started. For those who don't know me, I'm Paul Saunders. I'm the president of the Center for the National Interest. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm also a senior advisor at an organization called Energy Innovation Reform Project, and I was president there actually until the end of last year. And this is a jointly sponsored meeting, so I'm acting in two capacities, I guess I should say, today in welcoming all of you. I will not give a long substantive introduction. I think everybody knows, why these issues are interesting and important. That's why you're here. We are very, very pleased to have two really terrific speakers with us today to talk about competition and cooperation on energy and technology issues and also critical minerals in the Indo-Pacific. I guess the only substantive thing that I'll say myself is I'm very interested in and intrigued by our effort to work with all of our allies and close partners around the world on energy and other economic issues as we try to compete with China, because it poses what I think is a really interesting intellectual challenge, which is that our allies are our allies for security reasons, and our alliances are really based on security, we actually compete economically with a lot of our allies. So as we try to sort of pull everyone together to compete with China, we're also competing among ourselves. I find it an interesting policy challenge. But we're really thrilled today to have with us, as I said, two terrific speakers. Young Kim will go first. He's the Dean of the School of International Studies at Hanyang University in Seoul, the director, and I think also the founder, right, of the Hanyang Institute for Energy and the Environment. Someone who really has a long track record working on energy and energy security issues, including sort of the traditional, fossil fuel issues, and today certainly also critical minerals, electric vehicles, batteries, those questions. He's written a couple of books on that. And then, of course, familiar very much to the Washington office to my right, Jane Nakano, Senior Fellow at the Energy Security and Climate Change Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Of course, a former Department of Energy official too, and I think a very kind of prolific writer and strong analyst, also on really a very broad range, of energy issues, especially, of course, in the Indo-Pacific region. So very, very pleased to have both of them with us today. Young-Kyu, let's start with you. I asked each of the speakers to talk for about 8 to 10 minutes. So that's what we'll do. Then we'll open it up for questions. We are on the record, unless anyone says otherwise at some point during their comments. So please.
Thank you. I'm great to be here, and thank you for inviting me here. Probably I could start off with some of the fact that the global supply chain is dominated by China. How to reduce our dependence, but if you read some materials, much has been done on reshaping, rearranging supply chain, but still we are very much reliant on China. Sometimes we are very much surprised, the kind of products the U.S. imports from China, kind of products you're selling in the world, about 80% of them are from China. Especially if those products are strategic products like batteries, or EVs, or solar panels, or chips. I think that case in point is the recent fall of Volkswagen. You might have heard a report about this. Volkswagen, for the first time in 87 years, it closed down.
Maybe could you speak up a little? I'm sorry, just so that everybody can hear in the back. We were experimenting with mics, but we were getting a little too much feedback, so I'm sorry.
They are closing down factory in Germany for the first time in 87 years, which is equivalent to maybe reducing 20,000, which is one-fifth of the entire workforce, Volkswagen. The sense I'm having is that the edge China was enjoying about battery and critical minerals at the moment, kind of expanding into final downstream project, which is the EV. I think that kind of implication, China is having the advantage and edge will be much more significant than upstream, even midstream. So we need to think about how to respond to this China's oversupply, low-priced exports of EVs, batteries, and other maybe even chips. I think what all this indicates, is that kind of especially how Korea and the U.S. can collaborate. I think at the end of the day, most important thing is to South Korea and China. Our countries have to target countries in Southeast Asia and South and Latin American countries, and maybe Central Asia and Africa, because at the moment what is happening is that clearly the U.S. I think lost the solar and wind power energy race. What we are interested in knowing is that what lies ahead, what will happen to the EV race and battery race, which is probably in terms of, this is a bid for business, probably more significantly, this is a bid for national security. We have seen what's happening in Ukraine, the importance of security, importance of battery, drones and others. And also nuclear renaissance is coming, aided by SMR. Again, on this, America is playing catch up on both sides in terms of construction, which is, I think, dominated by China probably. China is known to have the only commercially operating SMR plant on land. On the other hand, America is also playing catch up on fuel for SMR, which is dominated by Russia. So here, I think the game of clean energy competition, I think at the level of grid, electricity, a little bit of an easier game. If we are just about to enter a much more difficult game, which is EV, much more strategically important. This will expand into many more areas, including nuclear and others, probably strategically more important. So So how do we respond? How do we collaborate? Especially, what's the role of South Korea? South Korea is known as a manufacturing powerhouse. Manufacturing, innovation, I don't know. Clearly America is losing on the manufacturing front, even on the innovation front. So on both manufacturing, innovation, the role South Korea could play, we need to think about this. And diplomatic front, as I said, it's important to target those in between regions and countries where many of these countries are loosening their ties with China in Southeast Asia, in Eastern and Central European countries, loosening ties with Russia. So how do we target those countries in terms of sourcing minerals, in terms of processing, EV exports? I don't know. I mean, most immediate concern will be EV exports. EV export. China, I think, is already signing some dealer agreements in many of these countries and building some plants. Very critical beachhead locations like Thailand, Brazil, Mexico. So we need to think about what America can do, especially what Korea can do. So I'll leave you with this. Maybe I can get some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jane.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay back there? Okay. It's really my honor to join both Young Kyu and then also Paul. And also there are so many experts in this room. So I'd love to get your feedback, but, as well as questions on some of what's happening, not just bilaterally, but in the bigger context where our two countries operate and strive to really be the leading force, whether it's supply chain issues or much more on I guess national security side, etc. I wanted to just start with the EVs and critical minerals, since just to I guess complement and perhaps also add my perspective. This is the area where there has, the earlier conversation, at least in Washington, has been much more focused on critical minerals needs for clean energy transition. And I personally think that clean energy components and technologies are important for not just for decarbonization, but then also for energy security, because diversified energy and electricity mix always gives you a lot of different options and choices. But more recently, there is finally greater attention to the minerals needs for strategic components or economic commodities, such as chips. And so I think we're starting to really, I guess, make our perspectives more probably better balanced and mature, if you will. But just quickly, I think there are a lot of common interest and goals between South Korea under President Yoon's leadership and the United States under President Biden's leadership. A lot of focus on supply chain security, as President Yoon's 2022, I believe, Indo-Pacific vision statement highlighted. And within that, I think these regional prosperity and stability are something that I think two countries can agree on. But when it comes to clean energy issues, going back a little bit, I think that there has been an interest in deploying these EVs, probably to varying degree, but things like solar, wind. But then there's a greater emphasis on developing them. I think a lot the the type of import dependence that certainly we've found in our nation on Chinese components have become, just economically challenging, but then also politically, unviable, as well as, with a lot of national security implications. But then when we look at, and then in the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of initiatives. Some are probably better funded than others. But when we really think of the still, a lot of efforts that are, I guess a lot of action. Let me rephrase it. When we think of what still needs to be done, there are so few countries with compatible capabilities. For example, when you look at the EV battery supply chains, back when I started looking at things beyond rare earth, which I started looking at back in 2010 over the Chinese non-official or unofficial embargo. The IEA, International Energy Agency, presented this, top countries that have the shares of EV battery manufacturing capacity. I think China back then had roughly 75% the global share in cathode and anode manufacturing capacity. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Korea had about 15 to 16%, and then Japan had 13 to 14%. Fast forward, if I'm not, I think it's the latest one, the IEA's data says that China's share has grown. This despite the fact that there have been more funding going into critical minerals, the whole value chains, not just the mining, extraction, processing, but some of the midstream, downstream projects, including support from the DOE's Loan Program Office. And of course, DFC is doing a lot of the overseas engagement. So I think the sense of urgency needs to be even better appreciated. And in this context, I think we still have a lot to do. And the in critical minerals and clean energy supply chain issues. And just for a moment, I also wanted to expound. I think it's important to note that this whole issue of innovation and manufacturing. I think manufacturing is key, but innovation is crucial. When we look at things like patent filings for hydrogen production and also consumption and application technologies like fuel cell vehicles, the United States is starting to lag quite a bit. And while partner countries like Korea and Japan are still working hard, but the data clearly shows that China is fast catching up, and in probably some of the specific segments of hydrogen, I think China may even exceed some of the other countries because China has not only the potential to become a fairly large-scale consumer, consumer of hydrogen, but also they are interested in producing them. Unlike Korea or Japan, it's not that Seoul and Tokyo are not interested in producing them. It's just that they're both quite constrained when it comes to hydrocarbon resources at home, but then also the area for massive deployment of renewable energy. And of course, there's definitely greater opportunity for the United States to collaborate much more closely with Korea on the innovation front, as well as manufacturing of key components such as electrolyzers, which right at the moment is dominated by China. About 2/3 of the alkaline-based electrolyzer technologies components are manufactured in China. But as we look beyond the current technology, as the more countries try to leverage their renewable resources for so-called green hydrogen production, the more advanced electrolyzer types like PEM will become much more important because they're much more compatible with intermittent sources of I guess feedstocks, if you will, for hydrogen production, and that's where I think that's where I like to see more investments going in from not just from Washington but from Seoul and others. EU has committed quite a bit of money. EU is, I think, probably the leading economy or economic bloc in innovating and trying to manufacture more of the PEM electrolyzers. But that's definitely an area. And just quickly before we open up for moderated questions and such, I am actually really encouraged by the level of heightening bilateral partnership with Korea. And I think this and next year will be extremely busy time in Seoul, I'd imagine, because Seoul, South Korea, has just become the chair of the Mineral Security Partnership. It's a multilateral, U.S.-led multilateral initiative where the idea is for advanced economies that are quite import-dependent for critical minerals get together and try to identify ways to unlock private capitals into resource-rich countries. Many of them are in developing countries, but some are in so-called upper middle class, middle income economies as well. But Korea has become the chair. Also, next year, Korea has the chairmanship of APEC. And I think already the indications are that there'll be a lot of more focused discussion on hydrogen, renewable, and nuclear nexus. And I think it'd be really interesting to see what sort of specifics may come out of that. And I guess I also just wanted to mention that after all, I think natural gas is an important source of energy. And when you look at Seoul's latest, I guess 15-year energy or electricity plan, there's a commitment to reduce the coal-fired capacity and to convert some of those coal-fired capacity into natural gas compatible or natural gas ready or natural gas power plants. When we think of all the energy related constraints because of geography, because of sea lanes, etc., I think the United States still has a lot to contribute there because, after all, natural gas is much cleaner than coal. But then also that is, as we look at what's happening in Europe as well, there's definitely but also national energy security value to that type of engagement. So let me stop there, and sorry, I'm all over the place. But
Thank you very much, Jane. Okay, let's open it up to questions, and please, when you ask a question, identify yourself. Anyone? Here, I have some. Let me kind of get started here as others think a little bit. So the Biden administration announced a few years ago the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum framework for partnership. And one of the pillars there, obviously, the clean energy pillar. I did some work on that. Actually, at Energy Innovation and Reform Project a few years ago, wrote a report. As we look at the region and U.S. Sort of broader attempts, that go beyond bilateral relations, between the U.S. and Korea or the U.S. and Japan or others. Do you think that is a framework that will endure, beyond the election? I mean, there is a logic to it. There is a logic to it. It's not kind of a frivolous question. Every administration wants to put its own stamp on policy, of course, and certainly the Trump administration started its own version, of a minerals group, and that evolved. The Bush administration started certain things that the Obama administration carried through. There are other examples like that. Do you think that's a framework that can endure? And I guess, for you, Jane, kind of here in Washington, is it something that we might expect the next administration, whichever it is, be thinking about something like that? And Young-Kyu, from your perspective, in East Asia, do you feel that there's demand for something like that from the United States? But Jane, perhaps
Sure.
you first.
Thank you. And IPEF is obviously one of the key multilateral U.S.-led initiatives. But according to the Trump campaign, messages, my understanding is that IPEF is not something that may endure.
Not a priority.
Right? Yeah, not a priority. At the same time, I'm glad that you actually reminded me of. I actually meant to mention how U.S. focus on things like critical minerals and supply chains. Actually, that really dated back. That dates back to one of the earlier clean energy focused one was under Obama administration, but certainly the Trump administration really jump-started the effort. Had two executive orders. One really led to much more comprehensive look at our the state of the U.S. Critical minerals. Later, obviously, the Biden administration review the 100-day supply chain that even sort of a deeper dive on for including critical mineral sectors. But anyways, but the point is, if the substance is what really has much more of a bipartisan interest, such as critical mineral supply chains, then I think the work, is durable often, but the name of multilateral engagement may not. And that's just life in towns like this. And to some extent, maybe the presidential countries with presidential system that has extreme decisive shift, as opposed to some of the more of a parliamentary system. Each administration wants to have put its own stamp. So I wouldn't be shocked. However, I think the clean energy supply chain related work has been quite actively led by, I think Commerce Department has been doing really important work, very effective work there on supply chain side. Of course, clean energy, DOE and such, there's a lot of synergy, but maybe, depending on what happens in November, certain elements may get elevated and then repackaged, I suppose, could be. But after all, it's as far as a lot of expertise that exist, not just within the government like DOE national labs, but companies with technologies, companies with market expertise. We're pretty much the same people. I mean, so there's still continued sort of a foundation to be able to support if some of the more the durable agendas can be still highlighted.
Thank you, Young-Kyu. Your view,
Right.
Is that something
Yeah.
that governments in the region want and expect from
Right.
the United States?
In terms of shifting global supply chains away from China, I mean, look, which countries can replace China? Well, probably those countries can be either, Vietnam, India, probably Indonesia. In terms of sourcing minerals, and also in terms of manufacturing, which country can be a replacement in terms of manufacturing base? And also size of market, in terms of selling, batteries, EVs, or decarbonizing energy system. Like I said, this is a business, right? But also national security. So So look around. I mean, the world. Which country can become a replacement for China? Many of these countries happen to be this region, Indo-Pacific region. So the practical meaning of building a new framework, I think the way I understand it is just practically speaking, they're these countries. This is how China, I think, viewing the game, because see where China is going. China is going to Thailand, Indonesia. India is a different story, but look where China is going. So this is, I think, how I see in the Pacific region, and also in terms of supply chain disruptions. What we have to do, I mean, under this new framework, probably making sure that when supply chain, certain material supply are in disruption, probably we can think about joint storage, joint stocking, like under the IEA system. This is what we did last week here. I mean, Jane mentioned here last week in DC, there was Pillar 2 for the first time, supply chain, kind of a demonstration drill, right? So Korea was heading this demonstration drill. So when something happens, they're making sure that nothing is in disruptions. Another thing, as I mentioned, the point I'm trying to make today is that the U.S. lost the solar and wind race. Then what lies ahead is maybe EV race, along with battery. Battery is not just for vehicle, battery for grid level storage. So if you look at steel, America, I think, is importing 70% of batteries from China. 70% from China. Just split in half. Half from like a grid storage. The other half, vehicle, battery for vehicle. Both can be, militarily used as well. So EV battery, exports. China is squarely, I think, targeting the weak spots, right? Weak spots. So how do we respond? How do we respond? As I said, we need to replicate what China is doing. We need to target those countries, right? Thailand. These are really critical, countries. Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam. Vietnam is also, in terms of rare earth element, very important country. So both in terms of mineral extraction, processing, and as a market as well. We need to look at these countries from different angles.
Bob, yeah, Robert Mann.
Thank you. I'm just curious how to what ability we can separate all this, because I look at China's global strategy. They're building EV plants in Mexico, Czech Republic, Turkey, Indonesia. And in Southeast Asia, we've seen solar assembly in Thailand and other ASEAN countries. So I think it's more complicated than we think, and I don't have an answer, but I'm just curious, is the notion of licensing technology. For example, China is ahead of us in battery technology, some EV technology, and solar technology. Is it a dumb idea to think about technology transfer going in our direction for a change? Or, and if you think back to the 80s when we had the same sort of posture towards Japan, part of the answer was Japanese auto factories being built in the U.S. And so far, the toxic climate on China, Ford wanted to build a license a CATL battery factory. The governor of Virginia rejected it. They finally put it in Michigan, and they've gotten a lot of flack for it politically. But I think Ford understood just what I'm saying, that if we're going to, there's no reason we can't learn from license this stuff the way American automakers did when Japanese companies built factories here. So how much can we build up our own capability, and how much interaction makes sense?
I think that, as I said, U.S.-China decoupling, I think there is reality, but also rhetoric, also reality and rhetoric. So these two countries, I don't know how much they can decouple. These two countries, economies of these two countries are inextricably intertwined. This is very much true. But for security reason, or I'm thinking for prosperity of our economy in the future, we need to separate. This is reality. How to separate is inextricably intertwined two economies, supply chains. This is really difficult question. And as a Korean, as I read many reports, we are closely watching how America is responding to this challenge, how EU is responding to these two challenges, this difficult challenge. A little different. Because the way EU, China intertwine, the way America, a little different. You know, I mentioned the case of Volkswagen. The way the European countries are seeing this a little different. They want to bring back factories from China back to Europe. A little different. This is not how Americans are doing. A little different. And also in terms of decarbonization goal, Europe much more urgent than here. So they have to decarbonize, but without China, how to do it? That's their question. Here, I think that in America, why is Biden so obsessed with? I mean, he wants to. Why does Biden hate China, Chinese EVs and vehicles? Maybe consumers in this country might have different views. It's cheaper ones, like half the price. So for security reasons, here, connected car and others. So we are seeing two different reactions from EU and America very closely. And as you know, the global top automaker is Toyota, with about 5 million cars production. Second, Volkswagen, about 4 million. Third, Hyundai Kia. Third, about 3.5 million cars yearly. So the way we see this Volkswagen case is that maybe we could replace Volkswagen. This is how Hyundai and Kia looking at this issue. They have a huge presence in DC. They have lobby machine here. So this is how we are looking at it. But in Korea, Chinese low-priced EV rate has begun as well in Korea. We are struggling to respond to that. So, I mean, this is it.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bob. I actually would love to get your own thought. I mean, because you've done a lot of work, and also you practiced in U.S. diplomacy, especially vis-a-vis China. I remember our time together back 20 years ago. Anyways, so I actually thought that the Ford project with CATL was really interesting in that where the U.S. does not really have a capacity to reshore because EV battery manufacturing is now where we used to shore. So like literally, so nothing to really reach. Or so I thought there may be a lot to learn. Obviously, some of the details are, I don't think I have access to all the details. My latest understanding is that the technology component in that agreement is a lot more sort of a black box style. So if that's indeed the case, then there will be job creation benefit, but to what extent that initiative could really help U.S. Gain expertise from leading global battery suppliers or manufacturers such as CATL. So that's one question I have. So that exactly what are the terms, and to some extent, and also I do remember reading about how the Chinese government itself is a little concerned about to the extent that CATL may collaborate with Ford, right? So the type of stuff that we used to worry about in the 80s, now, Beijing, the Chinese government seems to be worried about. The other thing, and it's also interesting, you mentioned some of these EV battery factories that the Chinese are building in places like Mexico and Turkey. At least my understanding right at the moment is that factory in Mexico is to serve the Mexican market as opposed to sort of targeting the U.S. through not NAFTA, the U.S. Thank you. Yes. MCA. Yes, USMCA. Sorry, I need another more coffee. But of course, these measures, like it sometimes it's just a matter of like rerouting. But we need to be really, be ready for what if, the factory indeed starts trying to really reach the U.S. market. I don't know if it's just more, that's going to be much more of a USTR type of concern, or there may be many other things. But I also thought that reading all these news, there's the national security concern has been invoked, and I do think that we need to be more vigilant about as to what really are, which cases really merit that national security type of scrutiny versus others, because our domestic companies need to be able to face healthy competition in order to stay relevant and stay competitive. Lastly, there used to be a time when we could impose tech transfer restrictions on, outbound stuff, and to some extent sort of control what happens in the, I guess, counterpart economies. When it comes to China, they're innovating, not just manufacturing. And of course, there are certain components that are extremely sophisticated. Even in nuclear, the Chinese have been building a lot of nuclear power generation reactors, but there are certain, components, certain technologies that we still have leadership over. But it is a sort of a different world now. Our tools that used to help us safeguard our industries, but then also a lot of national security concerns, they are not exactly optimally designed to really address the type of challenges that China poses. And if I may, just quickly, the difference between U.S. and EU, not really for today, but I'm always struck by, chatting with a lot of European energy researchers. I'm always struck by the fact that interdependency is part of their life. I mean, as EU, as an economic bloc. So I always thought that even leading up to, their dependence on Russian, fuel, obviously, the Russian natural gas, obviously Russia is not part of the EU, but there's a degree of interdependence that the European policymakers and also voters seem to be able to tolerate down U.S. voters and policymakers. I'm not a psychologist, but that has always stayed with me as I watch how the debate, the whole EU sanction discussions evolve vis-a-vis Russia and etc. But that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Absolutely, and over here and over here. Let me just say one thing on the dependence thing. Actually, two things. So, I mean, there is obviously a big difference. And the United States, of course, was energy independent, quote unquote, in the past. And then we had sort of really surging economic growth, and our energy production didn't keep up with that, and it changed. And now it's kind of, going back in the direction where we're like the world's largest, oil and gas producer, which is kind of remarkable. And obviously Europe has never been there. But I think there's kind of another really interesting question that you're sort of alluding to there, which is kind of what's the right number? How much dependence is sort of safe, and how much is too much? And to me, at least, it's not obvious. I mean, maybe 75% is too much. Certainly for Germany, it looks like 40% was too much, in terms of the natural gas. But where do you draw the line? I mean, it becomes kind of a big challenge, actually, and I think a lot harder than it seems, because if you're missing 10% of something and it's something you really need, I don't know, sir, over here, and sorry, and then I'm sorry, you first, and please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm Akshat Singh. I'm with the India chair at CSIS, where I lead my team's work on critical minerals. A significant part of my daily job is to annoy Jane, so always good to hear from you.
So a new opportunity outside the office.
Absolutely, and I will take it.
Wonderful.
As Yankyu rightly mentioned, India is a significant piece of the critical minerals puzzle for the US. Rightly pointed out, India has one of the largest reserves for rare earth elements, which are actually found along with thorium, which is, of course, significant for thorium-based nuclear energy plants for countries. When it comes to sourcing or moving processing or moving manufacturing at the midstream or at upstream levels, ultimately the decision that companies need to make have to be price conscious, right? Which is where China seems to be winning. They have blatant ESG violations. They're able to process minerals at a very low cost, and therefore companies which require big capex amounts for investing in processing facilities in other countries can't do so. Now, my question is, are there frameworks for US to support partnerships in a direct financial way in the Indo-Pacific region? One thing that we've been talking about is a Quad Critical Minerals Agreement, which can allow countries access through the IRA. Are there other frameworks that we've been talking about? There's MSP, but there hasn't really been any concrete announcement of private sector investment through the MSP yet. So what sort of frameworks can we think about here, and what can be certain challenges that emerge when we start implementing these?
Jane, I think that's
Yes.
probably for you, since
Yeah,
U.S. policy.
Yeah, so you're right. Quad back in I think April had a export credit agency agreement, but as far but the Development Finance Corporation can invest, provide loans, political risk insurance, and also make equity investments into minerals projects. So nothing, and it's not, but DFC support can go to low and low to middle income. Countries, and as well as upper middle income countries, if those countries or the projects or the support, DFC support, has strategic values and also has some sort of development benefit. And often, so to answer your question directly, DFC can support. There's no geographical restriction against operating or supporting projects in Indo-Pacific. However, some of these countries are not really low income. Many are probably upper middle or even above. And I think there is a whole process where you demonstrate that even if the target country is upper middle, their strategic values and et cetera. I think that's something that may get more attention as the DFC goes through the reauthorization next year. So it's definitely worth following. But when it comes to things like mineral security partnership, you could see that as sort of a framework, but it's also that's more of a coordinating body. Sort of bringing together investors, governments of different countries. One thing I also wanted to note, and it's not that you missed it, but I think often I think in the U.S. we tend to underappreciate the importance of the security of demand for many of these countries. To some of these countries, or actually many of the countries, China has been an important customer. They have been buying their minerals. Obviously, China has interest in processing them, and then actually more recently, in recent years, using them to be able to manufacture greater value-added commodities. But in general, we tend to underappreciate the security of demand that some of these resource-rich countries need in order to be able to proceed and say, okay, we will work with the United States or EU or whoever, it could be as well as China, but not but just because of the pretty predictable signal coming from China in this regard.
I'll just observe. Oh, sorry, please, go ahead.
Seen from Korea, I think that I don't know how much companies are complying with those big overarching multilateral framework, but what is changing companies' incentives behavior is really IRA. I don't know, it's kind of difficult to explain, but Korean automaker Hyundai Kia, I mentioned, third place. We have battery companies, 3 battery companies, providing maybe a little more than 50% of all the battery capacity. Those companies, especially battery companies, their problem was that they are reliant on minerals from China and processed one especially. So after America kind of moves on these issues from geopolitical perspective, what these Korean companies found is that the way they have been doing business cannot go on like this. Why? Well, I mean, it's an issue of values. It's an issue of values. We don't want to be stigmatized. We don't want to be stigmatized. I mean, relying on unethical materials. Korean companies, they're aware of this. So they are moving away from China. Also, I mean, there's incentives package from the United States government, like money that was given by the government. So we are moving factories to the United States. Batteries and EVs and chips, we are moving our factories to the United States or Canada, at least. For cathodes and PCAM, we are moving factories to Canada. So why are Korean companies doing it? Values. So this cannot be explained by these IPF and others. And also global norm of sustainability. Korean companies are complying with these norms and rules. So
Thank you. Yes, and then we'll just kind of go down this side. Please.
John Barnwell with the Embassy of Canada. I think the values play a big part of it. However, markets haven't recognized those values yet. And, I think that it's a steep challenge if you look at an EV, even with 100% tariff, that is still cost competitive.
Right.
And so I'm curious about at least the Korean view on innovation. And you referenced rare earths earlier. I mean, the only way that U.S., Canada, or anyone else is going to be able to compete in rare earths is innovation to do it cheaper, because we just can't do what China does to produce the arrow. So I'm curious about battery chemistry and some of those areas, as far as like the Hyundais and Kias of the world are thinking.
Yeah, I think the Korean automakers are doing relatively better than Volkswagen other European countries. Probably because I think that these Korean Hyundai and Kia, they are shifting to hybrids. So kind of we are targeting a niche market. Wait until the market brings back to normal. So that's how we avoid the extreme pace. Another thing, I think that this is also American makers are doing. We are looking at mass market brand, the premium ones. So that's another kind of a strategy.
Anything?
But it is really challenging for, Korea has so many leading companies, whether it's the battery manufacturers or the actual automobile side manufacturers. The challenge, but the market size is the challenge. And I think it's something that the U.S., again, may underappreciate. Some of these countries really need the export market to be able to underpin that industry. So no, I don't have much to add, but I appreciated your question and his comment.
Please.
First of all, I want to say how much I appreciate the speakers, and I appreciate the mentions also of IPEF and APEC, which are very near and dear to my heart. We're very happy that the Republic of Korea will be hosting next year, and APEC is sort of, it is an incubator of ideas. That's why it's endured. And I think for IPEF, it's meant to be an affirmative model that addresses all of these kind of common challenges, and I think that's why some of these mechanisms may endure. But I wanted to hear maybe a little bit more about what are some of the ways that we support that innovation? How do we drive towards, whether it's creative models on the demand side for like purchase power agreements for clean energy, which we're seeing some things in, whether it's circular economy that reflects maybe more values and thinks about more holistically. Like, what are some of the drivers of that from a policy perspective, from a mechanism perspective? Because some of these multilaterals are mechanisms, and I think given that we are seeing that it's our bilateral relationships are incredibly important. I cannot not say that as the State Department person. I'm sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm Mary Brett Rogers Springs. I'm the Director of Economic Policy in the Bureau of East Asia and Pacific Affairs at the State Department. My office does cover APEC and some of the IPEF cross-pillar initiatives. So, like I said, near and dear to my heart. But, what are some of the things that you're seeing that are working? And I know we touched a little bit on industrial policy. We talked a little bit about the differences between the U.S. and the EU approaches to things. But if you can go into that a little bit more and say how do you think we support that innovation, whether it's working with the private sector or what more can be done? Is there space that we're not doing enough in, or where we could do more, where you see positivity across countries?
Right. One of the things that I think that I feel sorry about with Korean relationship is that there is much joint work between these two countries. It's just Korean companies are moving their factories to the United States. But in terms of innovation, what are these two countries really doing? I don't see much. There's something going on between the U.S. and Japan, like on next generation battery technology development between the U.S. and Japan. But I don't see that between Korea and the United States. Probably I can propose some ideas, such as because Korea is so much absent on like extraction, critical minerals. Maybe it'll be a good idea. Like this is the spirit of MSP. It's a good idea that South Korea and the United States go to some country, like in South and Latin America, Chile and others, or Africa, or Central Asia. We can locate some mines and maybe do some exploration. And if we find some chance of having some critical minerals, then we can do jointly extraction. So we don't have this between these two countries. Or, as you mentioned, I think in the future, especially extraction and waste management, same thing. Same thing. So I don't know how much we can do about making things circular, but we can develop something about circular use of waste materials. So that's another thing. It's all about innovation, technology. So we need to do it. We need to do it. This is real ally partnership because to confront China alone, impossible. Impossible. So in terms of EV, like a Volkswagen and others, many countries, companies are looking very closely on the Volkswagen case. So the way I read it, Japanese makers, besides Toyota, they are making some alliance, like a Mitsubishi, Honda. So they are working together. So this is what companies do. So on the country level, this is what we have to do exactly. Because to confront China alone, impossible.
Thank you very much. So I think I have 3 people and we have 11 minutes. So I'm sorry, 4 people. So what I'd like to do actually is just to take all 4 of those at once. So you each have an opportunity to speak. And then we'll come back to you two for closing comments. So down here.
Sure. My name is Luc Hoefsloot from the Dutch Embassy. I mostly work on economic security. I'll try to keep the question short, but short introduction. You mentioned everything about more the supply chain side of this discussion, especially ultimately there we're likely going to end up more in a de-risking scenario than a complete decoupling. But ultimately, in that means that there continues to be a mutual dependency, and the difference with the gas case between Russia and Europe is the dependency that China has on the combined group of Asia, Europe, and US is not money, but innovation and knowledge, right? And I feel that very often that side is underappreciated and we don't talk about it enough. So if you can say anything about what you think we need to do as governments to really better integrate innovation policies on batteries and other technologies between each other and ensure that we actually run faster and keep that dependency.
Thank you. And then my colleague, Greg Priddy.
Center for National Interest. I'll keep mine very short. I was thinking about the demand side, and I wanted to see if you could address, there's been some weakness in the recent sales numbers for EVs in the U.S., And if we're trying to encourage diversification of supply chains, there's obviously a lot of private capital that needs to go into that alongside government support. How does that look, and to what extent is that going to present headwinds for diversification?
So EV demand, and do you think there's
And the fickleness
enough
of American
demand
consumers.
to pull in the money? And then we'll come to you at the end.
I'm Lily Pike. I'm covering China with Foreign Policy Magazine. A question for Jane. Building off of Luke's point about dependencies, I'm curious to what extent you see China as already weaponizing its critical minerals. We see, graphite, germanium, gallium, and most recently antimony being restricted to some extent for export in recent years. Do you see those moves as responding to needs domestically in China to protect those supplies, or is that an effort to actually weaponize those supply chains?
And
Sure, thanks. I'll wrap up. Courtney Weatherby with the Energy, Water, and Sustainability Program at the Stimson Center. I'm curious mostly about sort of the opportunities and gaps and challenges in doing partnerships with third countries, particularly developing countries. We've talked a lot about the importance, for instance, of Indonesia, Vietnam, India in partnerships. My impression from engagements with stakeholders around the region who are interested in partnering with the U.S. is that currently the sort of anti-China rhetoric that comes in partnering on technology and critical minerals has made it very difficult for them to partner with us, and also that the sort of the lack of clear funding available for investment in projects on the U.S. side also makes it quite difficult. So I'm curious if you can sort of identify where you do see opportunities for partnerships with those developing economies that are so critical for the future transition.
okay, who wants to go first?
Well, I mean,
Okay.
you know,
Right,
You
yeah,
go
yeah,
first,
yeah.
and Jane, you get the
EV
last word.
demand, right. I think the current market is kind of in doldrums. But many of these, I think, headlines and reports about EV kind of revolution is out of charge. I think a little exaggerated. Because if you look at data, like from IEA, as I recall, I think last year, EV last year hit about 10 million. 10 million. This year, it's going to hit 17 million. Before it was like expected to reach 14 million. So what this says is that some of these reports and headlines are a little vibes-based. So we need to look at data. This doesn't say that the market is good, but I think what I'm saying is that looking to the future, I think EV revolution will go on, continue. I don't know in how many years, but continue. I think the automobile market industry will be completely changed. So we need to accept that. But how do we create demand? In the meantime, as I mentioned, although major OEMs are pushing off the point of full electrification, like formally 2030, 2035. But maybe one of the strategies will be like targeting, as I said, mass market brand and hybrid. This is how we can wait until the market brings to normal.
Anything on innovation or third country partnerships?
Third country partnership. Well, I mean, like what China did in terms of ODA. I mean, we provide some package deals, not just technology, but these developing countries.
Okay. And
Sure.
Jane, I
Yep.
think that leaves you a lot to cover. And
Yeah.
remember also the question on weaponizing. Is
Yes.
China weaponizing?
Sure.
Which I
Yeah.
think was
Yeah.
directed specifically to you.
Sure. So let me start with the innovation piece. I think combining both. Sorry, I didn't catch your name, but Luke, and then also Mary's question. I think there's the United States government has a lot of national labs, and like literally, it's a wealth of expertise. And I'm a bit biased because as a former DOE person, but I think there are a lot of like lab-to-lab engagement that could still safeguard some of the elements that are important for healthy competition. But then also on the much more basic innovation side, and then it probably merits relook in the current context as to how much more could be done with like-minded countries in either the innovation side, government collaboration, as well as perhaps some of the 1 in 5 track type of engagement, because some of the national labs also have the commercial side of activities. Among OECD, sort of like-minded partners too, I think innovation policy coordination is, I'd imagine, because there is an element of competition, and there should be a competition, healthy competition. It is always really hard to strike the right balance. And when I think of even the earlier conversation, way before China started, imposing all these export controls on minerals, I always thought that this will be as much competition among non-Chinese economies as it is with sort of, China versus West type of, much more sort of a simplistic view. So I do share, I thought your question was extremely important. I do not have the answer, but I think there's probably much more look, whether it's maybe could be under NATO, to be able to give much more sort of a safer space to talk about certain, really national security implications of misaligned innovation approaches, and certainly there is much more conversation going on the export control side. So there should be there might be if the opportunity is right, maybe policymakers can go sort of upstream onto the innovation. So I do think that is China starting to weaponize minerals? Yes and no. I do think from Beijing's perspective, some of these things like gallium and germanium, that's in response to the U.S. export control on chips, but I think it's clear that the critical minerals, especially the ones like rare earth and graphite, where China has not just the mining or resource dominance, but also processing power dominance by far, right? China is the leader. They're aware of the U.S. and Western vulnerabilities. When you look at things like foreign entity of concern definition, or even the recently announced tariffs, graphite has the grace period. I wonder why. So it's clear, but at the same time, I do think that there has been a growing need by Chinese companies to be able to consume them to produce more higher added value commodities. I don't have the latest number, but a couple of years ago, I saw that China actually is starting to have an import dependence on for some of the 17 rare earth minerals, and they're starting to consume much more compared to, I guess, 2010 to 2015 timeframe. So they're as much consumers. So I guess your answer has multiple, I guess, factors or reasons, to be fair. And then last but not least, Courtney's question about opportunities. I think it is really tough. So they're looking at Southeast Asia, for example, there are some countries, many countries have a very close economic relationship with China. But then also, again, Chinese companies have successfully reached out to, manufacturers in, places like Thailand. So what do we have to offer? It comes down, down to that question. So do we have EV battery manufacturing capacity we can share? Not really. We're still hoping to learn more from CATL and others, whether it's depending on the mineral chemistry composition, we're a lot weaker than we wish. And then so about the processing capacity, we don't, I think the idea, I mean, even domestically processing is, fairly, it could be challenging to the local environment. And there's a lot of effort into coming up with more sustainable processing technologies. Maybe there are some companies that want to partner up with us and be, I don't want to say a test bed, but maybe, I'm not sure. Financing, we don't really hear much about Belt and Road these days, but clearly there is already sort of a Belt and Road engagements that may seem to be serving as good foundation for China to continue upgrading some of the not just the outbound goods and services, but then also inbound. Can we match the Chinese Belt and Road type of financing? No. ESG, I mean, that's, I truly think that ESG is very important. However, if that is the only thing that we can offer, it's pretty tough sell. And yes, so, but by the way, I think the Export-Import Bank of the United States is starting to also expand, or trying to become much more active in the minerals resources area, and some of the projects, in third country that uses U.S. components, that could benefit. So just to come back to the whole the funding constraint, I agree with you, but there's still some tools that could be augmented and perhaps refined to be able to benefit some of the overseas, third country projects that way. We'll see.
I'll just say a couple of things very quickly before we wrap up here, and thank you both for all of that. On the innovation question, there has been a real evolution on the American right on that issue. And I think in the past, you would have seen kind of most on the right take the view that tariffs stifle innovation because you're kind of protecting domestic industries and reducing their incentive. I'm hearing more and more people from that side kind of making a case that, by taking away these markets from the United States, the Chinese are taking away the resources from our companies that allow them to fund innovation themselves. And we need to stop that. So that's very much a view that's out there. We sort of edged up to the tariff question a number of times, during this session without quite going there. But I think for some people who have that sort of Trump perspective, I think there's a view that tariffs are a way actually to support innovation. And on the third countries, I'll say that there are some people on that side who are also really starting to think in different ways on those questions. And I heard someone recently speaking who's kind of arguing that what we really need to do is give grants to a number of these countries to help them hire lawyers to fight China on all kinds of debt cases for BRI projects and all this other stuff, and just give them money to turn them loose, in every different international body and tie all of that up. So there are a lot of different ideas that are emerging out there, and some of them, may not be things that people are used to seeing from the United States. If we end up going in a direction like that. But anyhow, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Please thank our speakers. And I hope we see all of you again soon. Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.